What's up guys, Divinder122 and it's teaching day. Today's subject is gonna be card advantage. We are not just gonna be talking about regular card advantage, we're also gonna touch on one very specific card later in the video. Card advantage is an extremely important concept for players to understand if they want to get to the next level of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh play. Not only does it help you make better plays and actually win duels, it actually just makes you a better deck builder and Yu-Gi-Oh player in general. What is card advantage? Well, long story short, it's simply the count of cards that you control in your hand and on the field compared to what your opponent has. It does not consider cards in the deck, it does not consider cards in the graveyard, cards in the banished pile don't count either. So get that out of your mind. It's important. Let it go. And the best way to keep track of card advantage is to literally just count the cards with what we call pluses and minuses. A plus or minus is referring to the card economy of the card. Basically how much advantage it gets you or how much advantage it loses you. The best way to explain this is to use an example, and probably the easiest example we can use is Pot of Greed. Pot of Greed's on the ban list because it is an inherent, what we call +1, and pretty much a completely free +1. What does that mean? If a card does not stay on the field like a normal spell doesn't when it is used, it is inherently a -1. You are using a card from your hand, it is going to the graveyard upon resolution, you have lost a card to use it. Monsters and continuous spells and traps are a little different because they stay on the field once they're used, more than likely, so you don't lose a card to use them. But normal spells are inherently to activate a -1. However, upon resolution of Pot of Greed's effect, which is probably the shortest worded effect in the game, draw 2 cards. You now draw 2 cards. So you use the card Pot of Greed, which is a -1. This will be minus hand, but you drew 2 cards, +2, meaning when this one cancels out this one, you are left with 1 extra card, meaning it is a +1. You used 1 card, but you got 2, so you netted 1 card. You have 1 more card than you started with. That is why Pot of Greed is a +1. Not every plus or minus in this game is dealing with you getting cards. Sometimes it's talking about removing cards from your opponent's field. If your opponent has 2 monsters face up on the field and you use the card Regeki, that is considered a +1 maneuver because you used 1 card, but they lost 2 cards. So even though you're down a card, they're down 2, so you control 1 more card than them. And that's good because the more cards you have, more answers to their cards that you have, and then you'll eventually, if you just assume that every card in your hand and their hand are 1-for-1s for each other, you end up with an extra card, which means you're going to win because your opponent's going to run out of stuff. It's a very bare bones way of looking at it. And that really is all there is to it. Why do we care about this? Well, when building decks and making plays and trying to win in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh, you're going to find that keeping track of your card advantage and what plays get you the most card advantage are very important because it's how you win. If you find your deck is discarding too much, you'll end up with tons of dead cards, or you're running out of resources too fast. If you don't have enough draw power, you can't get to cards that you need, and you're going to find yourself nagging yourself just to make plays, and that's not good. You want to keep the card advantage rolling so that you can keep playing the game. Building your deck with card advantage in mind makes you make proper decisions and proper ratios when building your deck, because now your deck actually functions smoothly as opposed to like dumping all of its resources or bricking or something like that. Now we're going to get to the part of the video that actually inspired me to make this, and it's a very specific card, Pot of Desires. A little while ago, I think last week maybe, or earlier this week, I don't remember, Team APS made a video about the most controversial cards in the game, and I believe number 1 was Pot of Desires. Pot of Desires is a controversial card because even though it is inherently a +1 maneuver, it is a very costly +1, and not every deck can run it. And why is it a +1? Well, like Pot of Greed, you just draw 2 cards upon resolution. It's a normal spell, so it uses 1 card, therefore you end up with 1 extra card, +1. However, it has the activation condition of banishing face down the top 10 cards on your deck. Some people who aren't very good at the game, the scrubs, will say this card is a -9, because even though you've got 2 cards, you lost 10 plus the card to use it, which is a -11, so therefore you're netting -9 cards. However, this is completely 100%, and I can't stress this enough, incorrect. That is wrong, that is dumb, and if you think that, it's wrong. It's like saying 2 + 2 is 5. It's not a thing. It's simply not a thing. Cards in your deck are not considered a resource. They are not part of card advantage, like I said before. This is why I made a big old point about it. I'm getting salty about this already because this drives me freaking insane because I have to keep talking about this to people, and it's oh boy, do I get heated when I talk about Pot of Desires. Whoa-wee, Jerry! I just get a little passionate when it comes to this card because I don't care whether you like the card or dislike the card, you need to make your opinion based on something that's actually a thing and not just making things up like Neg 9. Not a thing. Cards in your deck are not a resource, and it's very important as to why this is not a resource, because you can't get at them. Alright guys, I'm going to pause the video right here just to elaborate on a point I'm making right now, because while I'm editing the video I noticed that I kind of skimmed over this. When I say that a card in your deck is not advantage, this is because card advantage only counts cards that are in play, cards that are actively on the field or in your hand, which you have ready access to and are about to use or can use at any given time, because those are the cards you have immediately at your disposal. Cards in your deck or in your graveyard don't necessarily do anything for you because they completely count on other things and other factors to work. Let's say like a Mizuki in your grave or some hooey like that. And that's when we start talking about, I believe you could call it virtual advantage, where you have cards that don't actually immediately do something but may do something later, but that is not the subject of the video. But sorry, carry on, Dave. The biggest problem with Pot of Desires is that because it banishes face down 10 cards off the top of your deck, you are losing 10 cards out of your deck, which is probably a quarter of your deck, which means it's very likely that if you're a combo heavy deck, you're hitting combo pieces, thus bricking future plays. Therefore, even though you've gone +1, you can't actually make a play still because all your good stuff is now in the banish pile. And because it's face down, it's extremely hard to get back. It's effectively out of the duel. However, you still went +1. You used a card, you just bricked your deck doing it. But it's still a +1. That's how card advantage works. I'm sorry. However, because it is a costly +1, I can see why people dislike the card, and I completely agree with you. In certain decks, this doesn't work. However, does that make the card bad? No. It means your deck is bad, because you built a deck with a bunch of one-offs and then shoved 3 Pot of Desires in it. So it could have been 37 cards of pure meta-defining power, and then you ruined it by putting 3 cards in it that just don't work. The same logic could be applied if you're playing, I don't know, Light Sworns and you shove Macrocosmos in it. Yeah, that makes your deck bad because you put a card in it that ruins the deck. That's not Macrocosmos' fault that your deck is a graveyard-based deck. No, that's your fault because you put it in a deck that it doesn't work in. And Pot of Desires is a very fair card. That's probably the best way to put it. By banishing 10 cards off the top of your deck, it means certain decks, combo heavy decks that really need the draw power, can't use it. Therefore, they can't extend their plays out like crazy. And slower decks that don't need certain combo pieces and can kind of play off of anything, those can play this card. Also, it inspires a different breed of deck building. Instead of playing maybe 2 copies of a card, you opt for playing 3, so that Pot of Desires is a more safer play. If the deck is built around the card to work, the card works really well. Like I said, it's a very fair card because it's really the only true +1 generic draw card that we have that isn't tied to a certain archetype or certain deck or a certain attribute or only this can play it or only that can play. No, any deck, if built properly, can play Pot of Desires, and that's very special. Therefore, the deck needs to be built around it, and the card needs to be used with care in order to use that. Otherwise, it would be an inherently unfair card. Like Pot of Greed. You don't have to think when you put Pot of Greed in a deck. It's a +1. You don't lose anything for it. Boom, there you go, advantage. That's why it's on the ban list. So it's a balanced, fair card. And that is why Pot of Desires is inherently a +1, not a Neg 9. That Neg 9 thing is a bunch of malarkey. It's like saying MST negates. Alright, we're going to pause it one last time just to make a quick point. A lot of people bring up the fact that even though that you're banishing 10 cards off the top of your deck, it's not an official Neg 9, it's somehow a virtual Neg 9 because it's taking a quarter of your deck and removing it from the game, so now the rest of your deck doesn't work. Maybe you're in a situation where if you actually had the extra card, your hand would turn from a brick into a good play, but you play Pot of Desires and it doesn't fix the brick, and then you look at your banish pile and you notice that you banished the card you were digging for. It is not Pot of Desires' fault that that didn't work, it was simply luck, or rather bad luck. Not to mention that the next 10 cards in your deck you would have never seen, so you really can't say, oh, well, I would have won if I didn't banish this card, blah, 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 because that was 5 cards in, and the duel wouldn't have lasted 3 turns, so that card would have never been drawn. Basically, the top 10 cards banished off the top of your deck are just as useless as the bottom 10 cards still in the deck that you never see because the duel doesn't last that long. And as I said before, to close this video off, it has nothing to do with my opinion on the card, whether or not it is good or bad, and whether I think you are good or bad for liking or disliking the card. That's completely irrelevant. Just if you're going to have an opinion about it, make sure that you know what you're talking about. Because like I said, if your favorite deck is a bunch of one-offs, you can't run this. And therefore it is bad in your deck. So you are completely within your right to think that it doesn't work. Anyway guys, let me know in the comments below what you guys think, and if I triggered you with this one, just let me have it. I gotta hear these. I gotta hear these neg 9 arguments. They're always fun. And remember guys, if you don't troll the meta, who will? I'll see you guys next time.
The Destiny board tells me that you should subscribe to the channel, or you could watch some of these other videos. Now excuse me, my Millennium Ring has detected another Millennium item. Oh, it's just Merrick.
Akora, did you remember to get milk? We're out of milk. This milk is bad. It was terrible.